Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we step softly into the long shadow of Byzantium's golden walls to follow the life of a woman who will wear the crown of an empire and use it in ways no one dared imagine. You are in Constantinople now, the air sweet with incense drifting from the Hagia Sophia, the marble streets still warm from the day's sun. You will not need your sword here, only your curiosity, and perhaps the ability to walk quietly past guards whose eyes notice everything. Before we lose ourselves in tonight's winding corridors of history, I'll invite you to press like and subscribe to this channel. It keeps these midnight tales alive, a lantern burning in the dark, so I can return to you with more whispered histories and forgotten intrigues. And as we travel together, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time the story finds you. Perhaps someone across the world, or across your street, is hearing this same tale under the same moon. Now, walk with me. You pass under the great bronze gates of the imperial palace, the sound of the hinges groaning like some old soldier remembering a battle. The porphyry columns rise above you, their purple-red stone glowing under torchlight. Purple, the sacred color of imperial blood. It's here that newborn heirs are delivered into the porphyra chamber, a sanctified room lined in the same rare stone, so that they might carry the title porphyrogenitus, purple-born, a claim to legitimacy none could contest. But tonight's subject, Irene of Athens, did not come into the world wrapped in such privilege. She was born far from these walls, in the city of Athens itself, an ancient place still proud of its philosophers and temples, though by her time, Athens was a provincial shadow of its classical past. No purple swaddling clothes, no imperial nurses. Her family was respectable, likely of minor nobility, with enough wealth to educate her but not enough to keep her from becoming a political bargaining chip. You first see her entering the palace not as an empress, but as a bride-to-be, chosen to marry Leo IV, son of Emperor Constantine V. Why her? Scholars debate even now. Some suggest her beauty, described by chroniclers as radiant as marble under the sun, caught the eye of imperial matchmakers. Others argue that her family's connections in Athens promised loyalty from a distant province. A more cynical view, she was politically unthreatening, or so they thought. The day she arrives, you walk beside her in the long colonnade, the sun flashing off the gilded domes above. Her eyes take in everything, the mosaics of emperors past, the perfumed gardens, the courtiers who watch her with polite detachment. She walks in a gown of deep blue silk, the hem brushing the marble like the tie, her hair bound with gold threads that catch the light with each step. The porphyra chamber is not for her, yet she will walk past it, feeling its weight like a silent challenge. You can almost hear her thoughts. If she cannot be born purple-born, she will become something greater. Purple-born. A eunuch named Storakios greets her, bowing low. He will become one of the many figures in this story whose loyalty is difficult to measure. His face is smooth, unreadable, as he gestures toward the audience hall where the emperor's family awaits. Leo IV, her betrothed, stands in a shaft of afternoon light. He is young, his frame lean, his expression composed. He carries himself with the quiet caution of a man raised in a court where smiles can be daggers. You notice his hand resting lightly on the pommel of his sword, a habit, perhaps, or a reminder. Their meeting is brief, formal, and watched by half a dozen officials who will later whisper about every glance. She bows, he nods, and the machinery of empire moves forward. That night, as the palace feasts in their honor, musicians play the soft notes of the lyre and flutes, their melodies curling into the rafters like smoke. You taste honeyed wine and roasted lamb, but your eyes keep drifting to her, seated beside Leo, speaking little, listening much. It's easy, here in the candlelight, to think this is the start of a fairy tale. But you already know the Byzantines do not deal in fairy tales, only in power, survival, and the long game. A quirky little fact the court gossips share. In Athens, Irene was said to wear a perfume made from crushed rose petals mixed with a touch of cinnamon. A scent that lingers longer than most promises in Constantinople. Whether true or not, the rumor adds to her mystique. And perhaps, when she passes by the emperor-to-be, he catches a hint of that same scent and remembers it. The marriage will bind her to the empire's heart, but it also binds her into a web of eyes and ears. In the imperial palace, you cannot so much as tilt a cup without someone noting it. And Irene, the outsider, the provincial, will learn to master this world faster than anyone expects. For now, though, you leave her in the great hall, her fingers resting lightly on the rim of her goblet, her gaze steady as she listens to the chatter around her. The gold light of the chandeliers paints her face in warm tones, but her mind is already elsewhere, mapping out the palace's rooms, the people, and perhaps even the futures she could claim. You don't know it yet, but in a few short years, the girl who walked past the Porphyra chamber as a guest will walk it again as its ruler. And the steps from here to there will be anything but gentle. Then you slip back into the palace corridors with her, and by now the gilded mosaics feel less like decoration and more like mirrors, always watching, just like the people who live here. You notice that Irene, barely settled as Leo IV's bride, has already begun weaving something far less tangible than silk, a network of eyes and ears that will serve her as faithfully as any imperial guard. NMCC Hun. It begins with the eunuchs. In Byzantium, these men are not just servants. They are gatekeepers, record keepers, whisper carriers. Their lack of family ties is supposed to make them loyal only to the emperor, but Irene understands a subtle truth. Loyalty can be redirected, carefully, like water flowing through hidden channels. She doesn't approach them directly with bribes or threats. No, her style is quieter. You watch her pause to ask after a eunuch's sick mother or praise another's skill in arranging a banquet. A gift of rare silk from her homeland, folded neatly, appears in someone's chamber. A whispered promise of promotion slips into a conversation about the weather. By the time the recipient realizes what's happened, they've already begun to serve her interests. The silk merchants come next. They move between the palace and the city, their bolts of shimmering fabric concealing messages rolled so small they fit in the hollow ends of their measuring rods. You trail behind one merchant through the winding market streets, past stalls heavy with figs, spices, and hammered gold, and watch him duck into a side alley to exchange a quick word with a palace page. The conversation is so brief, so casual, that anyone else might think they were discussing dye prices. The information they carry is not always dramatic. A list of who sat beside whom at the last banquet, a note about which general seemed distracted during a council meeting. But here, small things become large quickly. Knowing that a certain official prefers his wine watered down can be as valuable as knowing his stance on imperial policy, because in Byzantium, both can be used. You catch a hint of a smile from Irene as she sits in the audience hall during a formal reception. To anyone else, it looks like polite contentment. To you, it's the satisfaction of someone hearing the echo of her own strings being pulled in a game where everyone else thinks they're the puppeteer. One quirky tidbit you overhear from a silk merchant. They swear Irene can identify the origin of a bolt of fabric by touch alone, knowing whether it came from the imperial workshops, from distant Antioch, or from even further along the Silk Road. It may be a party trick. Or it may be a subtle way of telling a merchant, I know exactly where you've been, and what you've seen. Still, there's a risk. Spies have spies, and some eunuchs remain steadfastly loyal to Leo IV. At one dinner, you hear two of them debating quietly, though with an edge, about whether the Empress's interest in court affairs is simply a dutiful wife's concern or something more ambitious. One wonders aloud if she is positioning herself for the day Leo might fall ill. The other shakes his head, reminding him that to speak too plainly in this palace is to risk waking up in the provinces with no explanation. Scholars still debate whether Irene's spy network was the work of a naturally cunning mind, or if she learned these tactics from watching Leo's own court maneuverings. Perhaps it was both. What's clear, as you shadow her through another day in the palace, is that she's rarely caught off guard. Even in casual conversation, her replies seem to anticipate what's coming next, as if she's already read tomorrow's scrolls today. You pass her later in the gardens, where the orange trees give off a sweet, sleepy scent in the afternoon sun. She's seated beneath a carved marble arch, a piece of embroidery in her lap. From where you stand, it looks like a delicate floral pattern. But as you draw closer, you realize the flowers form the outline of the Bosporus Strait, a subtle map, perhaps just coincidence. With Irene, you've learned, there is never such a thing as just coincidence. You pass her later in the gardens, where the orange trees give off a sweet, sleepy scent in the afternoon sun. She's seated beneath a carved marble arch, a piece of embroidery in her lap. From where you stand, it looks like a delicate floral pattern. But as you draw closer, you realize the flowers form the outline of the Bosporus Strait, a subtle map, perhaps just coincidence. With Irene, you've learned, there is never such a thing as just coincidence. You're still walking those sun-warmed marble corridors when the air changes. It's quieter, heavier, as though the whole palace has drawn a slow breath and is holding it. Leo IV, Emperor of the Byzantines, is dead. Fever, the physicians say, though the rumors are less certain. You remember the last time you saw him, pale in the torchlight, his cough rattling through a council meeting, yet still gripping the armrest of his throne like a man unwilling to let go. Now, the throne sits under its golden canopy, empty except for the weight of expectation. His son, Constantine VI, is too young to rule. That leaves Irene, no longer just the provincial bride who walked past the porphyra chamber with curious eyes, but the widow of an emperor and mother of the next. Her timing, to the outside observer, seems impeccable. For years the empire has been torn by the iconoclast controversy, a bitter divide over whether religious images should be venerated or destroyed. Leo IV had continued his father's policy of removing icons from churches, sometimes with soldiers breaking them down in public squares. It was a stance that made enemies, especially among the devout who clung to the painted faces of saints like old friends. Irene's own beliefs, that's a matter historians still pick apart. Some insist she was a lifelong iconophile, a woman of deep piety determined to restore the holy images. Others say her devotion was political convenience, a way to gather support from powerful monastic factions and the common faithful. Either way, within days of Leo's death, you hear quiet order spreading. The ban on icons will not be enforced as harshly, and the whispers of possible restoration are growing louder. You walk with her into the Hagia Sophia, its vast dome like a sky turned to stone, the air cool and smelling faintly of candle smoke. She moves slowly down the nave, her silk skirts whispering, her head inclined as though in prayer. At the apse, the great mosaic of Christ that had been plastered over during the iconoclast years, still hidden. But you see her fingers brush the wall, as though she can feel the face beneath. The clergy notice, the people notice, and in the palace, you notice that her household staff, especially those eunuchs you sought her cultivating, now speak of her not only as empress, but as protector of the faith. That title is worth more than gold in an empire where religious legitimacy can sway armies. A quirky tidbit you overhear from a palace scribe. Irene keeps a small ivory diptych in her private chamber, carved with an image of the Virgin Mary. It said she brought it from Athens, wrapped in linen, hidden among her wedding gifts so no iconoclast official would confiscate it. Whether this is true, or a tale planted by her supporters, you can't say, but it's exactly the kind of personal relic that could cement her image as the champion of holy tradition. Of course, not everyone is convinced. In the candlelit side rooms of the palace, some of the military elite grumble that this talk of icons will distract from defending the eastern frontiers. One general mutters that the empress's piety will cost the empire more than any battle, a statement he wisely swallows when a palace guard enters the room. You see Irene balancing on that delicate thread between religious symbolism and raw political survival. She is still in mourning, veiled in black silk, her jewels muted, but her eyes are anything but sorrowful. They are watchful, calculating, already measuring the steps she needs to keep the regency in her hands. You pass her one evening on the terrace, the bospress glittering in the moonlight. She's speaking softly to an elderly bishop, her voice smooth as Porto, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve. The words are too low to catch, but you can tell from his expression that he's leaving this conversation entirely convinced of her sincerity. Was it faith? Was it politics? As you watch her silhouette against the silver water, you realize that in Byzantium, the two are often the same thing. You wake the next morning to a palace already humming with the muted tension of court politics. Constantine VI is emperor in name now, his title pronounced in the formal chambers, but in reality, he is still a beau, his feet barely touching the floor when he sits on the throne. That means Irene holds the reins, and she knows it. You walk beside her through the audience hall, where the nobles and generals gather in carefully arranged clusters, their robes and armor flashing in the light like a peacock's tail. She greets them with measured warmth, her voice the same calm register whether she's speaking to a provincial governor or the commander of the imperial guard. But beneath that calm, you can feel the strategy at work. Every conversation is a calculation. Who can be kept close? Who can be divided from their allies? Who must be replaced entirely? The great families of Byzantium are no less dangerous than its foreign enemies. They have their own networks of influence, their own ambitions for the throne, and a beau emperor is a tempting vulnerability. Irene's gambit is to outplay them all, to appear cooperative while steadily pulling decision-making into her own hands. One tactic is disarmingly simple. She rewards loyalty quickly and visibly. A minor noble who backs her receives an estate upgrade. A general who voices support finds his pay doubled. It's not just generosity, it's a public display of her ability to deliver more than her rivals. And when a rival finds himself suddenly without a lucrative post or reassigned to a distant province, the message is equally clear. You pass through the palace gardens and notice a gathering under the cypress trees, Irene with her most trusted advisors, including the eunuch Storakios, who now acts more like a chief minister than a courtier. He reads from a list, naming governors, judges, and military officers. After each name, Irene gives a single nod or a quiet instruction: keep him, move him, remove him. It's like watching a chess game where the pieces are human beings, and the board is the empire itself. A quirky tidbit you overhear from one of the scribes: Irene keeps a small box in her private study filled with miniature carved chess pieces, each labeled with the name of a court official. No one knows if she actually uses it for planning, or if it's just a joke she keeps for herself, though given her mind, it wouldn't be surprising if she did both. Her regency isn't without opposition. In one heated council session, a senior noble dares to suggest that Constantine's uncle should share the regency. Irene listens without interrupting, her hands folded neatly. When he finishes, she smiles, a slow, deliberate smile, and thanks him for his thoughtful suggestion. 2 weeks later, that noble is dispatched to negotiate a vital treaty in a remote border region. Negotiations there are known to last years. Scholars still debate whether Irene's consolidation of power was driven by genuine concern for stability or by sheer ambition. You suspect it's both. After all, in Byzantium, even the most pious rulers know that an unstable court invites for an invasion. One evening, you find yourself in the candlelit map room, where the empire's territories stretch across parchment under Irene's gaze. She moves a small ivory token from one province to another, her fingertip lingering over the capital. One mistake, she murmurs, more to herself than to you, and everything collapses. You step back into the corridor, the sound of her words following you like a shadow. She is playing for time, for authority, for the future of a boy who is emperor in name but still under his mother's shadow, and for now, her gambit is working. The air in the palace feels sharper now, as if the winter wine from the Bosporus has found its way into the corridors. Years have passed. Constantine VI is no longer a beau, at least in age. He walks with the title of emperor beside his mother, but the reality is more complicated. You see it in the way courtiers still address Irene first, in the subtle deferrals during council meetings. At first, Constantine tolerates disarrangement. But youth ripens into pride, and pride becomes resentment. Whispers circulate that the emperor intends to take full control, that he will sideline his mother's advisors, perhaps even banish her from the palace. You see Irene's smile tighten during public ceremonies. There is no open quarrel, not yet, but you can sense the tension in every shared glance. Byzantium has no shortage of rulers who lost their crowns to family rivalries. The throne itself often feels more like a chessboard than a seat. One late afternoon, you overhear an argument drifting from a side chamber. Constantine's voice is sharp, accusing his mother of undermining him before the army. Irene's reply is low, measured, and cold, the voice of someone who sees not just the current move, but the next 10. It is here, in this fraying relationship, that ambition takes its most dangerous form. Irene decides she will not simply cling to influence, she will take the throne for herself. And for that to happen, Constantine must be removed. In Byzantium, removal is rarely subtle. A forced monastic exile would leave him alive, a rallying point for enemies. Execution would provoke outrage, but there is a third, older solution: blinding. In this empire, a ruler who cannot see is considered unfit to govern. It is brutal, but in the Byzantine mind, it is also merciful compared to death. You stand in the palace gardens the day the guards come for Constantine. The fountains burble softly, oblivious. He's led away to a private chamber, flanked by soldiers whose eyes never meet yours. No one speaks openly of what happens next. Later, a servant you know well, a man who once delivered letters for Irene, tells you in a whisper that the emperor screamed only once. By the time he left the chamber, his eyes were bandaged, and he was no longer an emperor in anything but name. A quirky, unsettling tidbit emerges in the weeks after. The blinding was said to have been timed with a solar eclipse, so that Constantine's final moments of sight faded with the darkening of the sky. Historians still argue if this was deliberate symbolism or coincidence. You can imagine Irene finding poetry in the alignment. The sun dethroned. Publicly, she orders prayers for his health and insists he is resting comfortably. Privately, she begins commissioning new coins, with her image alone. When they're minted, you hold one in your hand. Irene, crown, and robed, no sign of the son she once ruled beside. In the candle-lit quiet of her chambers, you see her gaze at one of those coins for a long time before setting it down beside a small ivory icon of the Virgin Mary. Whether it's pride, guilt, or both, you cannot tell. In Byzantium, ambition rarely comes without a cost, and Irene has just paid in blood and sight. You feel it before you see it, that hush the palace knows when something important travels its corridors. The footsteps are careful, the breathing measured, and the gold fittings of a small chest clink so softly you might mistake it for wind chimes. You've learned to read this building like a mood ring, and today the color is bruised dark. By now Irene rules alone, new coins bear only her image. The court protocol says Basileus in the singular, as if the empire itself has tightened to fit around her shoulders. You move with the servants through a narrow passage to a private antechamber you've never entered before, where the walls are lined with silk in a green so deep it absorbs the light. The chest sits on a table in the center. Gilt panels, piney griffins in relief, wax seals impressed with a signet you'll pretend you didn't recognize. Myrrh clings to the air, sweet and heavy, the scent Byzantines use for both celebration and embalming, because this empire loves multitasking. A chamberlain clears his throat, and the sound seems far too loud. The ladies-in-waiting step back as Irene enters, her expression the calm you've come to fear. She doesn't ask what it is. She knows, everyone knows. Even without the whispers that have been curling through the palace for weeks, whispers of a man seen too often in the wrong hallway, of a gaze held a heartbeat too long, the box would explain itself. You remember him, the shadowed figure from earlier days, all understated strength and the steady bearing of a soldier. You never learned his name. The palace prefers pronouns when a story becomes dangerous. Some say he was a tagmatic officer, others insist he was a court official with more intellect than caution. A few point a wary finger at Idias or another power broker, because the line between lover and ally blurs easily in Byzantium, especially in the retelling. Historians still argue whether there even was a single lover, or if this entire episode is a propaganda not tied by enemies who wish to make Irene's heart look as ruthless as her head. The chamberlain breaks the seals, and the wax peels away with a faint tack, like a fruit rind. The clasps lift, the lid rises, and the myrrh lifts too, a slow exhale that smooths the edges of what the box contains. You do not look directly, you don't need to. You watch Irene instead, because the story that will travel the world is written on her face, not in the gilded corners of a chest. A blink, a stillness that tightens, then releases. Her hand does not shake, and you think, not for the first time, that if marble could breathe, it would breathe like this. There is precedent for such deliveries. Byzantium is fluent in symbolic messaging, and heads of rebels have traveled these roads before, displayed near the chalk gate as a grim punctuation to imperial decrees. That is the mainstream fact the palace scribes will nod to later, politely ignoring how this box was trimmed with brocade instead of iron, sealed with private signets instead of public stamps, scented to soften and ache words cannot touch. Not exactly the sort of unboxing you post to your followers. Hey guys, today we're opening a gilded catastrophe. But court culture has always been ahead of the trend, in the worst possible way. A quirky tidbit catches your eye. Tucked into the lid is a strip of ivory carved like a Pixis label, the kind usually used for scented ointments. Some clever mind repurposed the language of luxury to package a lesson. You can't decide if that's ancient sarcasm or just empire-level branding. Either way, the message is elegant and barbarous at once. Love in a palace is a ledger entry, and accounts are balanced in gold and silence. Who sent it? That thread phrase no matter how gently you pull. One version says an opposing faction arranged the execution and posted the proof to humiliate Irene, to show that even an empress cannot protect what she loves. Another insists Irene herself ordered it, the head delivered not to wound her but to test her, to prove, to her own circle and to the watching court, that sentiment would never outrank survival. A third story, popular in later chronicles, blurs Irene with other powerful Byzantine women. You can hear Zoe and Theophano rustle their sleeves in the background, the box becoming a portable rumor passed from century to century. Scholarly consensus refuses to sit still. Some argue the tale is a legendary overlay on a grim but ordinary purge. Others counter that its persistence suggests an original event later embroidered by palace gossip. You stand with the silence and notice the details no chronicle will bother to write, the soft click when Irene lowers the lid, the way the chamberlain folds the seals into a linen wrap, careful as a tailor salvaging rare thread, the glance the two ladies share, something like pity and something like envy, Because in this city even pain can look like power if it is worn correctly. Irene speaks at last, and her voice is distant shoreline, gentle, sure, and yielding. Orders follow, quiet and precise. The chest will go to a private chapel. Prayers will be said, a list will be drafted of every man who touched the courier's chain. You've heard that tone when she rearranges provinces, when she grants titles, when she removes obstacles. Today the obstacle is made of absence. By nightfall the city is a net of murmurs. A boatman whispers that he saw soldiers from the executors carrying a chest wrapped in velvet. A silk merchant claims a eunuch outbid him for a particular bolt. Funeral black with a temper, he says, and you almost laugh at the idea of fabric with opinions. A candle maker mutters that myrrh has doubled in price. The rumor becomes a river, and rivers always find the Bosporus. You drift past the chapel later. The air is cooler there, washed in beeswax and the faint salt of old stone. An icon lamp trembles. You remember how Irene once brushed a plastered wall in Hagia Sophia, feeling for a hidden face. You wonder what face she feels for tonight. If there is guilt, she swallows it without a ripple. If there is grief, she wears it beneath her robe like a hair shirt the court will never see. By morning the box has already turned into a proverb. A secretary jokes, too loudly, too early, that he'd rather receive a tax bill than the Empress's gift box, and his friend hushes him so fast the hush squeaks. You catch yourself thinking that Byzantine nature could use a pamphlet, workplace boundaries, a quick guide to not getting boxed. Sleepy joke, yes, but it keeps your nerves from fraying like cheap fringe on a state rope. The legend hardens over the weeks, not because everyone believes it, but because everyone behaves as if it could be true. That's the dangerous magic of stories inside palaces. They govern conduct even when they don't govern facts. Courtiers adjust their smiles, generals measure their flirtations against the weight of a gilded lid. Eunuchs renew their vows of discretion with the zeal of monks, and Irene, who has always balanced show and substance, begins to lean her public image a fraction more toward eye and a fraction less toward charm. You step back through the green antechamber one last time, and notice the table ring where the chest rested, a faint circle in the grain like a watermark left by a heavy cup. It's nothing, a splotch of history the cleaners will polish out by supper. But you know how stains work here. Even when the surface gleams, the story lingers. And the next time Irene enters the council chamber to discuss taxes, reforms, the troublesome loyalty of certain governors, the ordinary business of empire, every man present will remember that circle and pretend he doesn't. So the box becomes what boxes often become in Byzantium, a lesson you can carry. Love is a negotiable instrument, loyalty is insurance until someone files a claim. Consequences arrive wrapped in brocade, sealed with wax, perfumed to keep you calm. And if you need a bedtime moral, here's a gentle one. When you play chess with an empress who understands the board, try not to become the piece that travels home in a case. You notice it first in the markets, bread costs less, wine sellers smile more, and farmers arriving at the city gates grumble less than usual about the tax collectors. Irene has done something rare for a Byzantine ruler. She has lowered certain taxes, particularly the land tax that weighs most heavily on peasants and smallholders. It's a move that wins her quick affection in the countryside. You hear it in the sing-song chants of hawkers praising our generous basileus as they sell dates and salted fish. Peasant delegations arrive in Constantinople with baskets of figs and jars of honey, gifts of gratitude that taste like goodwill and political capital at the same time. But here in the palace, you know better. Tax relief is never free. It buys loyalty in one quarter, while paying for it by tightening the purse strings elsewhere. And in the high halls of the empire, Irene is already spending her new political currency in a much more ruthless marketplace, the one where rivals are bought, sold, or quietly removed. You trail her through the audience chamber, where her most trusted eunuchs deliver lists. Governors suspected of disloyalty find themselves reassigned to remote provinces, where they will wield no influence. Wealthy nobles who supported Constantine's claim are suddenly invited to take extended pilgrimages to monasteries far from the capital, the kind of trips that last a lifetime. And more than a few officers in the imperial guard are retired early, their pensions generous enough to discourage them from returning to politics. One mainstream fact the chroniclers recurred: Irene's reforms in this period brought short-term stability to the empire's finances. By easing rural burdens, she encouraged agricultural productivity, which in turn meant more goods flowing into the city. Historians agree it was clever, though they still debate whether her main goal was economic health or political survival. A quirky tidbit you overhear from a tax scribe: When Irene reduced the land tax, she insisted on personally reviewing the new ledgers. One page, he swears, contained a tiny doodle in the margin, a smiling cow next to the name of a particularly fertile district. Was it the hand of the Empress herself? He doesn't know. But the idea of an imperial doodle in the tax books makes you smile. Still, the mood in the court grows colder for those who had once been her allies, but are now inconvenient. At a reception one evening, you stand near the edge of the hall as a group of dismissed nobles exchange hushed words. The word tyrant hisses out from between sips of watered wine. Another mentions the box in a tone so low you almost miss it. Treason blooms in whispers long before it makes the jump to swords. The palace responds in kind. Irene increases surveillance in the barracks and doubles a number of informants in the Senate. The silversmiths who mint coins are quietly reminded that their loyalty is not negotiable. New issues bear her image with sharper lines, the eyes staring more directly outward. One afternoon you find her in the map room, tracing the grain routes from Thrace to the capital. Control the bread, she says without looking up, and you control the city. Control the taxes, and you control the nobles. It's not a boast, just a statement of the rules she's been playing by for years. Outside the palace, her popularity holds. Inside, it's a game of subtraction. Each purge removes a threat but also erodes the circle of those she can trust. You think of it as trimming a garden hedge. Keep cutting and you may find you've carved away more than you can replace. But Irene doesn't slow her hand. In Byzantium, hesitation is an open invitation for someone else to act first. And she has no intention of finding herself on the receiving end of her own brand of consequences. You feel the wind change again, this time from the west, colder, drier, carrying the scent of horse leather and cathedral incense rather than myrrh and orange blossoms. Messengers arrive at dawn with saddle-crusted cloaks, Latin on their tongues and winter in their eyes. You walk beside them through the rite of reception, the bowing and the careful counting of gifts, and as the protocol unspools you realize Irene is shifting from purges and ledgers to a different game entirely. Diplomacy with Charlemagne. You have heard the date repeated in corridors, like a psalm. Christmas Day, 800, when Pope Leo III laid a crown on Charlemagne's head in St. Peter's, naming him Emperor of the Romans. That phrase lands in Constantinople like a stone through glass. Emperor of which Romans? Exactly. The marbled ones on the Bosporus, or the bearded ones across the Alps. The empire has never been good at sharing names, and Irene has never been good at sharing power. Even her coins call her Basileus, not Basileus, a mainstream fact every courtier knows by touch. The title stamped hard enough to echo across negotiations. So you stand in the Chrysotriclinos while the envoys present their letters. Purple ink traces polite Latin curves, gold bulla flash. The scent of wax is heady, almost sweet. Irene listens with that light stillness you recognize, the calm of someone building a bridge while measuring where to place the trapdoor. The Franks want recognition. The Pope wants validation. Europe wants a diagram that will stop the map from arguing with itself. Irene wants something simpler and harder, to ensure that the word Roman continues to point to Constantinople. You watch her craft the opening move. She does not rage, does not declaim. She smiles, names Charlemagne king of the Franks and Lombards in her answers, and lets the room hear precisely what she does not say. At the same time, she allows a whisper to leak. Perhaps recognition could be found through a union, a concord of houses, as one eunuch phrases it, his voice soft as silk drawn from a chest. The rumor becomes a rumor of a rumor. Marriage. Irene and Charlemagne, a knot tying east to west, Rome to Rome, a solution so audacious it feels like myth while it's still breathing. You walk behind a line of courtiers through the covered garden as the idea takes its first careful steps. Is it true? Historians still argue whether a formal proposal ever reached parchment, or whether Irene floated the notion as a kite to see which way the wind would yank the string. One chronicle insists negotiations advanced far enough for both courts to practice how to seat two emperors at one table without flipping it. Another calls a whole thing a propaganda glow stick waved by enemies after the fact. You file it beside the box and the eclipse. In Byzantium, the truth often travels in a cloak to sizes too large. Still, you see what the story does, even as a possibility. Frankish envoys begin counting syllables when they say emperor, carefully trimming the plural. Byzantine officials grow suddenly precise about titulature in documents, as if each letter is a soldier on a narrow bridge. The papal court, though never present in these rooms, hovers like a second chandelier, glittering, heavy, impossible to ignore. A quirky tidbit pops up over dinner. One palace translator swears that a Frankish envoy tried to compliment Irene's purple silk by asking where she bought her dye, and a eunuch replied with a smile that the sea provided and the secret belonged to God. You picture murex shells stacked like tiny helmets somewhere along a coast and try not to imagine the inverse. Byzantium's brand management remains unmatched, even flattery, us pass quality control. You sit with the Empress in the map room again, your old haunt of shifting borders. She taps the parchment lightly where Italy nests under the Alps. A word is a fortress, she says, half to you, half to herself. We defend it or we lose the field. You hear in that sentence the entire strategy. Stall, redefine, offer a dazzling alternative, stall again. If the West insists it holds an empire, perhaps the East can make the claim irrelevant by proposing a union that would crown her chose. If the union never happens, the talk itself can keep the ground from hardening beneath Charlemagne's new title. And yet, time refuses to freeze. You feel factions moving underfoot, the way you feel water moving beneath river ice. The same palace men who help lower taxes and raise prayers whisper that a marriage to a barbarian king, and yes, they still use the word, would stain the throne's memory. Others murmur that Charlemagne's armies, formidable and fresh from Lombard victories, offer a shield worth the compromise. A few, more cynical, say that Irene's true target is not Charlemagne at all but the nobles inside her own walls. The rumor allows her to flesh out who will balk and who will bend. You track the gift traffic like a patient accountant. Frankish cloaks embroidered in simple crosses. Byzantine silks woven with double-headed deagles flexing in gold. There is talk of horses, of reliquaries, even of a magnificent organ shipped west, its pipes glittering like an upside-down forest. Yes, an instrument that can thunder a psalm so loudly a hall forgets its own opinion. Somewhere in there, you suspect, is the music of leverage. The world beyond notices Abbasid messengers tasked through in opposite directions, trading greetings between Irene and Harun al-Rashid. You picture Carolingian scribes scratching notes while their calamus squeaks. The Mediterranean, for a moment, looks like a chessboard left in the rain. The square is still visible, the game still on, but the lines bleeding into one another. You smile at the image and almost apologize to the metaphor. Byzantium doesn't really play chess. It teaches the board to argue about what a bishop is. In the quietest hour of a long evening, you catch Irene studying a painted panel, her own portrait, small enough to fit in a courier's satchel. There is a custom, half remembered from other courts, of sending likenesses ahead of brides. A courtier later claims she tested which varnish traveled best in damp weather. Was that practicality or theater? With her, you never know. She sets the panel aside, closes the coffer with the softest snap, and lets the lamp burn down. The room smells faintly of cedar and ink. The endgame arrives quickly and sideways, like most ends in this city. Inside the palace, the eunuch Micphros the logothete gathers discontented men like kindling. Irene's dance with the West has given them a rallying point. Too bold, too foreign, too dangerous. They do not need to prove the marriage plan is real, they only need to prove it could be. And while envoys are still practicing which door to use, Irene is seized in 802 and sent, not to a wedding, but to exile. You watch the negotiations evaporate in the space of a sunrise. The West keeps its crown, the East keeps its word, and Europe keeps a brand new fracture line running down its spine. Later treaties will sand the edges under Michael I in 812. The Byzantines will recognize Charlemagne as an emperor, just not the Roman one. But tonight, in your hearing, the pieces stop moving. The board remains, the arguments remain, the papal tiara gleams in the distance like a second moon, and the word Roman goes on sleeping with one eye open. You walk the corridor where the green silk swallowed light around a box and feel how this, too, is a box of consequences, emptier, colder, lined with paperwork instead of brocade. Diplomacy here is just another method of embalming. Preserve the appearance, perfume the story, and send it where it must go. You make a soft joke to yourself, because sleep is easier when you laugh. If titles are crowns, then Byzantium owns the world's largest jewelry repair shop. And as you ease back into the night air of the garden, the orange trees whisper in a small whine. The stars hang like cautious coins, and somewhere beyond the water a Frankish choir rehearses for a mass that will echo for centuries. You tuck the sound into your pocket the way a clerk tucks away a seal, quiet proof that a conversation once tried to change the shape of a world. The corridors feel different now, not the hum of an empire in motion, but the hush of a stage between acts. Irene has ruled alone for years, her face stamped into coinage, her decisions carved into edicts. She has outlasted generals, silenced nobles, and balanced her empire between diplomacy and danger. But the truth in Byzantium is that enemies don't vanish, they wait, sometimes for decades. You first notice him again during a minor audience in the Chrysotrachlinos, Nikephoros, the Logothi to Genikou, the finance minister. He's unremarkable at a glance, tall, thin, with a face like parchment that's been folded too many times. A eunuch, and a quiet one by reputation. But the eunuchs of this court have always been underestimated by those who mistake silence for loyalty. Years ago, when Irene was consolidating her regency, Nikephoros opposed her fiscal reforms and lost. She stripped him of influence, boxed him in with lesser duties, a polite humiliation in a city where reputations are currency. And unlike nobles, eunuchs cannot retire to distant estates. They stay in the palace, moving through its veins like slow poison. Now, his moment has arrived. The empire's finances are strained after Irene's costly generosity to the peasantry and her diplomatic theatrics with Charlemagne. Her tax relief has won her friends among farmers, but the aristocracy mutters, and the army grumbles about unpaid stipends. Nikephoros knows how to speak to both groups. One mainstream fact the chronicles record. In late October 802, with Irene's popularity wobbling, Nikephoros leveraged his position in the treasury to rally discontented officials and military commanders. He promised stable pay, reduced favoritism toward monastic allies, and a return to sensible fiscal policy. Sensible meaning policies that enrich the right people. You are there, in the half-light of dawn, when the plot unfolds. Irene is in her private chambers in the palace of Eleutherios, perhaps still half asleep, when the guard commander, once hers, now theirs, knocks with a politeness that's worse than violence. No shouting, no drawn swords, just the quiet efficiency of a coup well rehearsed. She is informed that Nikephoros has been proclaimed emperor by the army and senate. The transition is swift, but in Byzantine fashion, it is also laced with theater. Nikephoros sits in the hippodrome, the imperial diadem placed upon his head, the crowd's cheers sounding more like relief than devotion. His first acts are ceremonial, reaffirming the army's privileges, ordering public games, but you can see in his eyes that this is personal. He has waited for this moment not just to take the throne, but to push Irene from it. A quirky tidbit you overhear from a palace cook: Nikephoros' coronation banquet featured a sweet almond cake dusted with cinnamon, the same dessert served at the banquet celebrating Irene's marriage to Leo IV. Was it coincidence, or a calculated nod to the start of her imperial life, now mirrored at its end? Even the cooks here understand that symbolism is Byzantium's second language. Historians still debate whether Irene could have avoided her fall. Some argue her generosity to the rural poor and church factions alienated the military at the worst possible moment. Others suggest she became too isolated, relying on her inner circle of eunuchs and advisors, while losing touch with the broader court. And then there are those who believe no amount of caution could have saved her, that Nikephoros' grouch was an ember always waiting for the right wind. In the final hours before she is escorted away, you see her walk the same halls where she once spun webs of silk and surveillance. The marble is still polished, the mosaics still gleam, but her shadow on the floor seems smaller than you remember. There are no outbursts, no pleas. She greets the guards by name as they lead her toward the waiting galley, the scent of salt and tar replacing the incense of the palace. As you watch the oars bite into the Bosporus, you can't decide which feels heavier, the crown Nikephoros now wears, or the decades-long memory of a woman who once made a box arrive like a sentence. In Byzantium, revenge is rarely quick. It is patient, precise, and when it arrives, it smiles. The voyage from Constantinople to Lesbos is long enough for the salt to crust on your skin and the sound of oars to sink into your bones. Irene sits under a linen canopy at the stern, her posture as regal as if she were still on the imperial throne. The sailors avert their eyes when they pass her, not from contempt, but from that Byzantine discomfort of seeing power stripped bare yet still holding its shape. Lesbos is green and windswept, the air sharp with pine and the salt of the Aegean. The port town offers no gilded gates, only whitewashed walls and the smell of drying nets. The imperial residence here is modest, 2 stories of stone, with a courtyard shaded by fig trees, but for an exiled ruler, it is almost generous. Mainstream history says Irene spent her final years weaving and selling silk to support herself. You see her at a loom in the upper chamber, the shuttles sliding back and forth like slow, deliberate breaths. The silk is fine, the purple dye faint, the imperial murex kept far from her reach, but the work is meticulous. She still signs her name on the ledgers, with a hand as steady as in her decrease. On quiet afternoons, she walks the shoreline. The pebbles shift under her sandals, the gulls wheel overhead, and the horizon is a blue line she never crosses. Villagers nod to her politely, some with genuine reverence, remembering the tax relief she once granted. Children stare without understanding who she is, only that she carries herself differently from anyone else on the island. A quirky tidbit you pick up from a Lesbos merchant: Irene sometimes paid for goods with small gold coins that still bore her face, though she'd turn them so the profile faced downward. Whether it was modesty, melancholy, or simply habit, no one could say. That the gesture gave those coins an almost talismanic quality. Locals kept them for luck rather than spending them. She does not speak often of her fall. Once, over a simple meal of bread, olives, and fish, she remarks to a visiting monk that the empire is like the sea, calm on the surface, storms underneath. It's the closest she comes to bitterness. Historians argue whether she tried to shape her legacy during these years. Some point to letters she sent to Constantinople, subtly reframing her reign as pious and just. Others think those letters are later forgeries, written by monks who admired her iconophile stance. The truth may be somewhere between. Irene may have woven her story alongside her silk, letting threads of myth slip into the warpanned weft. You are there on a late summer evening when the light turns the Aegean gold. She sits by the window, her hands resting on a folded length of silk, and she looks out toward the horizon for a long time. The sound of the loom has stopped. The air smells faintly of figs and salt. No words come. None are needed. You realize that for the first time in decades, she is not playing a game, only watching the tide. By the time the salt air of Lesbos has weathered her hair to silver, Irene's story is already being retold in the corridors she once ruled. You're not there to hear it firsthand. No one outside her household is, but the ripples reach you like rumors carried on a tide. The question is as sharp now as it will be centuries later. Was she a pious restorer of the faith, or a ruthless autocrat draped in purple? In Constantinople, the iconophiles remember her fondly. They point to the Second Council of Nicaea in 787, when she overturned the iconoclast policy and restored the veneration of holy images. That's the mainstream fact historians never omit. Irene as the ruler who ended the years of whitewashed walls and hidden saints, whose reign saw gilded halos return to the domes and walls of churches. Monks in distant monasteries copy her name into their records with reverence. Some even whisper the word Hagia, saint, but the soldiers remember other things. They remember campaigns stalled for lack of funds while she lavished gold on church-building projects. They remember generals exiled, officers blinded, rivals vanished. They recall the box, the whispers, and the steady narrowing of her circle until no one was safe from her suspicion. You find yourself in the company of a scholar who once served as a palace scribe. Over a bowl of warm lentil stew in a harbor tavern, he shrugs when you ask for his judgment. In Byzantium, he says, a saint is only a tyrant with better press. He wipes his mouth and adds, and a tyrant is only a saint whose enemies write faster. A quirky tidbit from the capital's gossip: in the decades after her fall, certain church processions carried an icon of the Virgin with features said to resemble Irene's. Whether it was deliberate homage or the artist's unconscious hand, no one agrees. But it kept her presence alive, blurred between the sacred and the political. Scholarly debate thrives on her contradictions. Some modern historians argue that her rule was one of the first true examples of a woman exercising sole, imperial authority in the medieval world, a precedent both celebrated and feared. Others suggest her reign weak and the empire by focusing inward, on court politics, religious disputes, and symbolic gestures, at the expense of military readiness. In Lesbos, she hears none of this directly, but sometimes, when letters arrive from the capital, you see her read them slowly, fold them twice, and tuck them into a wooden chest. No reaction shows on her face, but her fingers linger on the grain of the wood, as if counting the years between the girl from Athens and the empress in exile. At sunset one evening, she walks the shoreline with a local priest. You follow at a distance, close enough to hear the waves but not their words. They stop near a cluster of rocks, and she kneels, tracing something into the wet sand. The tide takes it before you can see what it was. You suspect it wasn't meant for anyone else to read anyway, and so the question remains unanswered, a box no historian has managed to open completely. Was Irene the saint who saved Byzantium's soul, or the tyrant who dimmed its light? In Byzantium, it seems, the answer can be both. By now the empire speaks of Irene in past tense, but the palace she once ruled has its own kind of memory, One kept not in official histories, but in small, strange details. One of those is the private world of imperial beauty rituals, a quiet theater of self-preservation and self-display where the stakes are nearly as high as in politics. You've seen glimpses of it before, passing open doors where ladies-in-waiting mix powders under filtered light, but now you linger long enough to notice the absurdity and the danger behind the glamour. Mainstream accounts of Byzantine court life note that appearance was both a symbol and a weapon. The empress was the living emblem of divine order, and her face was the canvas on which that order was painted. That meant every public appearance was preceded by hours of preparation, hair braided and pinned into elaborate coils, skin smoothed with creams, robes scented with imported oils. Some of these treatments were harmless enough: rosewater rinses, beeswax bombs, powdered pearls for a soft sheen. But others, well, that's where things take a turn. You hear from a former palace maid about a face cream favored by certain noblewomen, made with white lead to achieve a pale, pure complexion. Applied daily, it could indeed make the skin luminous, and slowly poison the wearer. Scholars still debate how widely this was known. Was it a calculated risk in the name of beauty, or simply a mystery ingredient no one questioned? A quirky tidbit the maid swears by: the most expensive sunblock in the empire was made from crocodile dung mixed with herbs, imported at enormous cost from Egypt. Whether it actually worked or was just another Byzantine luxury scam, no one seems sure. She laughs, remembering how the jars were wrapped in silk and stored alongside perfumes, as if their true contents were too unseemly to acknowledge. Hair, too, was an art form, often tinted with henna for a warm glow or darkened with walnut husks. You once saw a chamberlain carry a small chest of dyed hairpieces, ready to be woven into the empresses on braids for extra volume. Even fingernails were buffed to a shine with pumice and rubbed with scented oils, because in this court, the smallest detail could become the subject of gossip. Irene herself understood the theater of appearance. She may have been exiled to Lesbos without her regalia, but in the capital she had used her image like a signature. Her public robes heavy with embroidery depicting imperial eagles, Christ Pantocrator, or even symbolic flowers that courtiers would spend days trying to interpret. Was that pomegranate motif a nod to prosperity, or a veiled message to a rival family whose crest used the same fruit? In Byzantium, fashion was never just fabric. One afternoon, you watch a young noblewoman seated in the light of a high window, her face being painted with crushed cochineal for color in her cheeks. The brush strokes are gentle, the transformation subtle, but you realize the deeper game. In a palace where whispers can unseat an emperor, every shade of red on the lips, every shimmer of gold thread in a veil, is a kind of silent proclamation. And while these rituals might seem trivial compared to the council chamber or the battlefield, you understand their place in the Byzantine system. A flawless face could calm unrest, project divine favor, and disguise sleepless nights spent maneuvering political alliances. It could make a ruler seem untouchable even when the foundation under her throne was cracking. So, whether it's lead cream that slowly kills or rosewater that soothes, the ritual remains the same. In Byzantium, beauty is armor, and armor always comes at a price. The rumors start small, like coins dropped one at a time in a dark corridor. A servant overhears a phrase, hidden beneath the stones, while delivering wine. A mason swears he saw a section of palace cellar bricked up in haste before Irene's fall. By the time the gossip reaches the markets, it has become a full-fledged legend. Somewhere under Constantinople lies the treasure Irene took from the imperial vaults before Nicephorus deposed her. Mainstream history records that the imperial treasury was nearly empty when Nicephorus took the throne. Chroniclers explain this with her spending on churches, tax relief, and lavish gifts to monasteries. But others hint that gold simply doesn't vanish. It moves. You follow one such whisper to the palace's old storage vaults, where the air is cool and smells faintly of stone dust and damp cloth. The vaulted ceilings above you drip in slow, steady rhythms. Somewhere behind one of these walls, the rumor claims, is a sealed chamber stuffed with chests of coin, silk bowls, jeweled reliquaries, enough to fund a small army or buy the loyalty of a city. Scholars still argue whether the hoard ever existed. Some believe Irene siphoned funds quietly over the years, placing them in the care of loyal eunuchs and merchants. Others think the tale was invented by Nicephorus to explain why his own coffers were bare after he assumed power. The truth may be as tangled as any Byzantine tax record. A quirky tidbit you hear from a dockworker: not long after Irene's exile, a heavily laden galley left the imperial harbor at night, officially bound for Lesbos with her personal effects. when storms forced it to shelter on another island. Locals claimed the crew refused to unload any cargo, not even to save it from water damage. Too important, they said, though no one could agree on whether they meant holy relics or something far more liquid. You walk the city streets above this imagined treasure. The great cisterns echo under your steps, their forest of columns half submerged in still water. You imagine how easy it would be to hide something here, beneath the everyday flow of life, where only frogs and lantern light would witness it. From the heights of the Blockerney Quarter, the Bosporus gleams in the afternoon sun. Somewhere beneath these stones could lie the last wealth of an empress who understood that gold is as much a political weapon as an army, and that sometimes the safest vault is the kind no one will admit exists. Whether the gold sleeps under a monastery floor, under the sea, or only in the minds of storytellers, it remains part of her shadow. And in Byzantium, a shadow can be just as powerful as the thing that casts it. By the time Irene's name is spoken only in formal histories and whispered in back-alley anecdotes, one part of her legend has already escaped into its own strange afterlife. The box. That gilded, perfumed container with its infamous contents becomes more than a court scandal, it becomes a template. Mainstream chronicles rarely dwell on the more macabre traditions of noble vendettas, but here the truth is as gaudy as the rumors. For generations after Irene, powerful Byzantine and even foreign noblewomen borrowed the symbolism of her gift. Not always a head, sometimes a hand, a ring, a seal. Something unmistakably personal, sent in a package that says without words, I have removed the problem. You overhear a merchant from Trebizond telling a younger trader about a certain Lady Theodora in the 10th century who supposedly sent her rival's severed braid in a silver casket, along with a note reading, "You will no longer be mistaken for me." Was it true? Historians call it apocryphal, but the image sticks. Closer to home, an Armenian countess reputedly sent an enemy's helmet, still dented from the fatal blow, wrapped in embroidered silk, a direct echo of Irene's alleged style. The armorers in the bazaar even start referring to certain ornate traveling chests as empress boxes, half in jest, half in awe. A quirky tidbit you catch from a silversmith. In some elite households, commissioning a decorative chest with unusually heavy locks was a way to signal that you could send such a message, even if you never did. A kind of social bluff, turned into fashion. The scholarly debate, of course, is whether Irene truly began this trend or if her story simply crystallized a pre-existing practice. Evidence of trophy sending exists earlier in Roman and Persian traditions, but never so wrapped in luxury and scented with imperial theater. It's the blend of elegance and threat that makes the myth irresistible, a gesture that says, I can end you, while arriving in a container fit for a wedding gift. And so, centuries on, the gifted box becomes shorthand in Byzantine letters and satire. Poets use it as metaphor, gossips use it as warning. Even when the packages contain nothing but sweets or silks, the illusion is there. You imagine Irene, wherever history keeps her, half smiling at the thought. She understood better than most that symbols outlive the hands that craft them, and that once a gesture escapes into legend, you no longer need to repeat it yourself, others will keep it alive for you. By now the details of Irene's life are scattered, some preserved in gold leaf manuscripts, others surviving only in crooked whispers between market stalls, but the shape of her story endures. She is still the first woman to rule the Byzantine Empire alone, still the restorer of icons, still the mother who ordered her own son's blinding, still the rumored sender, or receiver, of a lover's head in a box. In the quieter corners of the city, her name becomes a shorthand for complicated power. Young women in the palace hear it as a warning and a challenge. Ambitious courtiers cite her as an example of both what to emulate and what to avoid. Even her rivals cannot quite erase her. Her coins remain in circulation long after her exile. Her reforms echo in the tax codes. Her decisions still shape the alliances and grudges of the court. One mainstream fact the scholars agree on: Irene's reign marks a turning point in imperial perception. After her, the notion that a woman could hold sole authority is no longer impossible. Dangerous, perhaps, but not unthinkable. That precedent threads its way through later centuries, shaping the possibilities for empresses like Zoe, Theodora, and Anna da Lucini. A quirky tidbit you hear from a monk in the capital: on certain feast days, a few icon painters slip Irene's features into depictions of the Virgin Mary, not as flattery, but as an inside joke for those who know their history. To the untrained eye, it's just another holy face. To the informed, it's a subtle nod to the empress who blurred politics and piety so well. Historians still debate her motives. Was she truly devout or merely pragmatic? a savior of the empire's soul or master of its cruelties. In Byzantium, those questions are almost the same thing, and so her legacy lulls the empire like a slow tide, sometimes gentle, sometimes pulling hard at the shore. She is a ghost in the council chamber, a shadow in the gardens, a lesson passed from one ruler to the next. That power is neither gift nor birthright, but a thing you must take, shape, and defend, knowing it will one day slip from your hands. The night in Constantinople feels heavy with incense, the Bosporus black and glassy under the moon. Somewhere out there, a box once traveled from one pair of hands to another, carrying a message too sharp to fade. And even now, when you close your eyes, you can almost hear the faint click of its lid, echoing across centuries. The halls are quiet now, the torches had burned low, their smoke curling like soft black silk into the rafters. The marble under your feet feels cooler with each step, as though the palace itself is exhaling after holding its breath for too long. You walk past mosaics that no longer glitter, the light is too dim, and their saints and emperors seem to lean back into shadow. Somewhere far away, the steady lap of the Bosporus against the seawalls keeps time, a heartbeat for a city that has outlived every ruler it ever crowned. In the gardens, the air is softer, the orange trees release their scent slowly, lazily, as if reluctant to let the day end. A faint breeze stirs the leaves, and in it you think you hear voices, not speaking, just existing, the layered presence of everyone who has walked here before. You stop for a moment beside a fountain. The water trickles over worn stone, patient and unhurried, rounding the edges the way time rounds the edges of memory. Whatever the truth of Irene's choices, whatever weight her crown carried, it has been set down. The game has ended for her, as it will for all players in time. The stars are steady tonight, their reflections trembling gently in the water. You feel the city settling into its own sleep, the stories curling inward like a scroll being rolled tight. And as you breathe in the cool, incense-touched air, you understand that some histories are not meant to be solved, only carried, like a small, sealed box, light in the hands, heavy in the mind. Sleep now, let the Bosporus keep watch, the palace will wait until morning.